I still remember the sound of Derek's laughter, sharp, cutting through the sterile corporate lobby like broken glass. It wasn't the kind of laugh you share with friends over a joke. It was the kind that makes your stomach drop, the kind that tells you someone has already decided you don't belong before you've even opened your mouth. "Are you serious right now?" he said, his voice carrying just loud enough for the receptionist to glance up from her computer. "Did you actually bring your mommy to a job interview?" My mother's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her purse strap. 43 years old, and I was standing in the marble-floored lobby of Meridian Technologies with my mom beside me, feeling every inch the child Derek seemed to think I was. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, trying to land a senior software engineering position, and I looked like I needed my parent to hold my hand. But Derek didn't know the whole story. He couldn't have known that 2 weeks earlier, my mother had been diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's at 58. He didn't know that this interview represented more than just a career opportunity. It was my last chance to secure the kind of health insurance and salary that might buy us time, might pay for treatments, might give me the resources to care for the woman who had sacrificed everything to raise me alone. He definitely didn't know that in about 30 seconds, his casual cruelty would backfire in the most spectacular way possible. Or that 6 months later, I would discover something about his own story that would turn everything I thought I knew about that day completely upside down. To understand how I ended up in that lobby, you need to understand my mother, Elena Vasquez. She came to this country when I was 3, speaking broken English and carrying nothing but a suitcase and an unshakable belief that America meant opportunity. My father had left us in El Salvador, just disappeared one day like morning mist, and she decided we were better off starting over than waiting for him to remember he had a family. What I didn't learn until years later was that my father hadn't simply abandoned us. He'd been threatened by gang members who wanted him to join their operation, and his refusal had put our entire family at risk. Leaving wasn't cowardice. It was the only way to keep us safe. He'd been sending money through intermediaries for years, money my mother pretended came from her extra work shifts to protect my image of him as a deadbeat rather than a man who'd sacrificed his relationship with his son to keep him alive. Mom worked 3 jobs to put me through school. Days at a textile factory, evenings cleaning offices, weekends babysitting neighborhood kids. I have memories of doing homework at her work sites, the smell of industrial detergent, and the sound of sewing machines becoming the backdrop of my childhood. She never complained, never made me feel like a burden, but I watched her hands develop arthritis from repetitive motions, watched her fall asleep, standing up at the bus stop after 18-hour days. "Mijo," she would say when I protested that she was working too hard. "Education is the only thing they can't take away from you. Everything else, money, possessions, it can disappear. But what you know, what you can do with your mind, that's yours forever." She was right, of course. I excelled in school, particularly in mathematics and computer science. By high school, I was tutoring other students and building websites for local businesses. I earned a full scholarship to UC Berkeley, graduated summa cum laude, and landed my first job at a promising startup. For the first time in my life, I was making enough money to send some home, to tell my mother she could quit one of her jobs. That's when the startup folded. Then the next job disappeared in layoffs. Then the company after that went through restructuring. The tech industry in 2019 was brutal, especially for someone without connections or a prestigious family name to open doors. I'd been unemployed for 8 months when Mom got sick, burning through savings and watching my confidence erode with each rejection email. But here's the twist I didn't see coming. Those months of unemployment weren't just bad luck. During my background check at Meridian, I would discover that someone had been systematically sabotaging my job applications, sending anonymous emails to hiring managers questioning my work authorization status and making false claims about my professional conduct. It took a private investigator, hired by Meridian's security team after I was targeted again, to trace the harassment back to its source. The morning of the diagnosis, I sat in the neurologist's office listening to words like progressive and irreversible, while my mother nodded calmly, as if the doctor were explaining something as mundane as a prescription refill. But when we got to the parking lot, she broke down completely, the first time I'd ever seen her cry. "I'm scared," she whispered, clutching my arm. "Not of dying, but of forgetting. Of forgetting you, forgetting how proud I am, forgetting that everything I did was worth it. Mom, we'll figure it out. We always do." She looked up at me with eyes that were already starting to show the confusion that would soon become constant. What if I forget to be proud of you? That's when I made a promise I didn't know if I could keep. Then I'll remind you every day. The Meridian Technologies opportunity came through a former professor who'd heard about their expansion. It was exactly what I needed, a senior position with comprehensive benefits and a salary that would let me afford both my mother's care and my own expenses. The interview process had gone well through 3 rounds. I'd solved their technical problems, impressed their team leads, and felt genuinely hopeful for the first time in months. Then, the morning of the final interview, Mom had her worst episode yet. I found her in the kitchen at 6 a.m., standing in front of the open refrigerator with a confused expression, holding a carton of milk like she couldn't remember what she'd intended to do with it. When she saw me, her face brightened with recognition, but I caught the flicker of fear before she composed herself. I was making breakfast, she said, but there was nothing cooking. It's okay, Mom. Let me help. But as I moved to take the milk from her hands, she pulled back sharply. Who are you? She asked, her voice rising in panic. Why are you in my house? The episode lasted 20 minutes this time, 20 minutes where my own mother looked at me like I was a stranger, where I had to convince her I wasn't there to hurt her, where I watched the woman who raised me disappear behind a wall of confusion and fear. When recognition finally returned, she collapsed into my arms, sobbing. I can't be alone today, she whispered. Please don't leave me alone. The rational part of me knew it was unprofessional. The son part of me couldn't bear the thought of leaving her when she was terrified and confused. The desperate part of me, the part that had been rejected dozens of times and was running out of options, decided that if this company wouldn't hire someone who took care of his family, maybe I didn't want to work there anyway. So I brought her with me, not knowing that this decision would set in motion a chain of events that would expose a conspiracy and a career and ultimately save both our lives. Derek Martinez was the first person I met when we walked into Meridian's lobby. Mid-30s, expensive suit, the kind of aggressively confident handshake that tells you someone has never doubted their place in the world. He was there for the same final round interview process. My competition for what I learned was actually just one available position. David Vasquez, he said, reading from his phone. We're interviewing for the same role. Derek Martinez, Stanford MBA, 5 years at Google. The credentials were meant to intimidate, and they worked. I introduced myself, mentioned Berkeley and my startup experience, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. That's when his eyes drifted to my mother, sitting quietly in one of the lobby's leather chairs with a book in her lap. Family member? He asked with a smirk. My mother, I said simply. That's when he laughed. Are you serious right now? Did you actually bring your mommy to a job interview? The receptionist looked up. A few other people waiting in the lobby turned to stare. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, but before I could respond, my mother stood up. Disculp, she said, her accent thick but her voice steady. Is there something funny about a son taking care of his mother? Derek's smirk widened. Ma'am, with all due respect, this is a professional environment. Bringing family members to job interviews is unusual. Unusual, she repeated, testing the word. In my country, family takes care of family. Here in America, I clean the offices of men who put their parents in homes and visit once a year. Which is unusual. The lobby had gotten quiet. Derek's confidence flickered for just a moment before he recovered. Look, I'm sure you're a lovely woman, but your son is trying to land a serious position. This isn't the kind of impression. The kind of impression that shows he values family? That he keeps his commitments even when it's inconvenient. My mother stepped closer to Derek, and despite being a full foot shorter, she somehow seemed to tower over him. You think less of him because he brought me. I think less of you because you would leave your mother alone when she needs you. Derek opened his mouth to respond, but that's when the elevator doors opened and everything changed. What I didn't know was that Derek's cruel laughter was being recorded by the lobby's security cameras, and that footage would later be used in a lawsuit that would destroy his career and expose a much larger conspiracy. Mr. Martinez? Mr. Vasquez? The voice belonged to a woman in her 60s, silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, wearing a navy blazer that probably cost more than my rent. She looked at the three of us with raised eyebrows, clearly sensing the tension. I'm Patricia Chin, CEO of Meridian Technologies. I was coming down to personally escort you both upstairs for the final interviews. My stomach dropped. The CEO herself, witnessing this disaster. Derek immediately shifted into professional mode, extending his hand with a brilliant smile. Miss Chin, it's an honor. Derek Martinez. You were just what? She interrupted, but she was looking at my mother, not at him. Something in her expression had changed, become more focused. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but overhear part of your conversation. Are you all right?" My mother, who had been fierce and confident moments before, suddenly looked small again. The adrenaline of defending me was fading, and I could see the confusion creeping back into her eyes. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "I'm just waiting for my son." Miss Chen studied her for a moment, then turned to me. "Mr. Vasquez, would you mind if I asked why your mother is here today?" This was it. The moment where I could lie, make up some excuse about transportation or timing. Instead, I found myself telling the truth. She was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's 2 weeks ago. This morning she had an episode, and I didn't feel comfortable leaving her alone. "I know it's unprofessional, and I understand if it—" "Stop," Miss Chen said, holding up a hand. She was quiet for a long moment, looking between my mother and me. Then she did something completely unexpected. She sat down in the chair next to my mother and took her hands. "Mrs. Vasquez," she said gently, "my name is Patricia. My mother had the same illness. Would you like to tell me about your son?" What happened next was the first of many surprises that day. My mother's face lit up with pride, and for the next 10 minutes, she told Miss Chen stories about my childhood, my education, my determination to succeed. She was articulate, warm, completely present, the mother I remembered before the disease started stealing pieces of her away. Miss Chen listened to every word, nodding and asking follow-up questions, treating my mother like the intelligent, accomplished woman she was rather than a burden or an embarrassment. Finally, she stood up. "Mr. Martinez, would you mind waiting upstairs? Rebecca at the front desk will show you to the conference room." Derek looked confused but nodded, shooting me a look that was part confusion, part triumph. He clearly thought my honesty had just cost me the job. After he left, Miss Chen turned back to us with an expression I couldn't read. "Mrs. Vasquez, I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. When your son was growing up, did anyone ever try to contact you about his father?" The question came out of nowhere, and I saw my mother's face go pale. "What do you mean?" I asked. Miss Chen looked directly at my mother. "Elena, I think it's time your son knew the truth about why we really wanted to hire him." The conference room 20 floors up offered a panoramic view of the city, but I couldn't focus on anything except the stack of documents Miss Chen had placed on the table between us. FBI reports, immigration records, financial transactions dating back 15 years. "Your father's name was Miguel Vasquez," Miss Chen began, "and he wasn't the deadbeat your mother told you he was. He was a software engineer who'd been recruited by our government to help build encryption systems for protecting activists and dissidents in Central America. When he refused to cooperate with criminal organizations who wanted that same technology, he had to disappear to protect your family." I looked at my mother, who was staring at her hands. "Mom, I wanted to protect you," she whispered. "I thought if you believed he abandoned us, you wouldn't spend your life looking for him. I thought you'd be safer." Miss Chen continued. "Miguel has been sending money through intermediaries for years, funding your education, making sure you had opportunities. When you started applying for jobs in tech, he reached out to companies where he had contacts, trying to help. That's how you got on our radar. But the rejections, the harassment." I started. "Miguel's former partner," Miss Chen said grimly. "A man named Carlos Restrepo who turned to the dark side after Miguel refused to give him access to the encryption algorithms. He's been systematically sabotaging your career, trying to flush Miguel out of hiding by threatening what he cares about most, you and your mother." The room spun. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my struggles, my father's abandonment, all of it was a lie constructed to protect me. "Where is he?" I asked. Miss Chen exchanged a look with my mother. "He's here. He's been working for us under an assumed identity for 3 years, helping us track down Restrepo's operation. He's been watching over you both, waiting for the day it would be safe to reveal himself." That's when the conference room door opened, and a man I'd never seen but somehow recognized walked in. He had my eyes, my jawline, 20 years of guilt and longing written across his face. "Mijo," he said, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry I missed so much." The reunion with my father was surreal, emotional, and complicated in ways I couldn't have imagined. 20 years of anger at his abandonment dissolved into 20 minutes of tears and explanations. He told me about watching my graduation from the back of the auditorium, about driving by our house just to see me leave for work, about the agony of staying away when every instinct told him to come home. But the most shocking revelation was still to come. "There's something else," Miss Chen said after we'd had some time to process. "Derek Martinez isn't who he claims to be." She pulled up a file on her laptop, showing surveillance photos and identity documents. His real name is Derek Restrepo. He's Carlos's nephew, and he's been placed in companies throughout Silicon Valley as part of their operation to steal intellectual property and identify targets for harassment. He applied for this position specifically to get close to you. I felt sick. The laughter, the mockery, that was all an act? Partly. He's genuinely arrogant and cruel. Those character flaws made him perfect for this kind of undercover work. But his primary mission was to ensure you didn't get this job, to keep you vulnerable and isolated until his uncle could make his move. My father's jaw tightened. What kind of move? Miss Chin's expression darkened. Carlos has been building a case to have David deported, claiming he's been working illegally on false documentation. The plan was to separate your family, make Elena disappear into the immigration system while she's vulnerable due to her illness, and force you to trade the encryption algorithms for their safety. The air left the room. Everything, my job struggles, Derek's presence at the interview, even the timing of my mother's diagnosis being made public through insurance claims, it had all been orchestrated. But bringing your mother today changed everything, Miss Chin continued. Derek wasn't expecting that variable. His reaction revealed his true nature to our security cameras, and more importantly, it showed us that you're exactly the kind of person we want working with us to bring down this operation. The interview, when we finally got to it, was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Instead of technical questions about coding languages and system architecture, Ms. Chin and her team laid out a counterintelligence operation that had been 3 years in the making. We want you to take the job, she said, but not as a regular employee. We want you to work with the FBI and Department of Homeland Security as part of a task force targeting technology theft operations. Your father's been building this case from the inside, but we need someone on the outside, someone Carlos's organization will try to recruit, to help us gather the evidence we need. You want me to be a double agent? We want you to be yourself, a talented engineer with apparent vulnerabilities that make you an attractive target. The difference is, this time you'll have backup. I looked at my father, at my mother who was listening with the clarity she sometimes still had, at this CEO who had just turned my entire worldview upside down. What about Derek? Miss Chin smiled grimly. Derek thinks he succeeded in sabotaging your interview. He's about to report back to his uncle that you've been eliminated as a threat. Instead, he's going to lead us directly to the entire network. The plan was elegant and terrifying. I would take the job at Meridian, but work on projects specifically designed to attract Carlos's attention. Derek would try to recruit me, thinking I was desperate and isolated. And when Carlos finally made his move, we'd be ready. The risks? I asked. Significant. My father said honestly. These people have killed to protect their operation. But Elena's illness means we're running out of time anyway. Carlos knows about her diagnosis. He's been monitoring your insurance claims. He'll make his move soon whether we're ready or not. I thought about my mother, about the promise I'd made in the parking lot of the neurologist's office, about Derek's laughter and the system that had been designed to crush people like us, about the father I'd hated for 20 years who had actually been protecting us from shadows. I'll do it. The next 6 months were the most intense of my life. By day, I worked as a senior software engineer at Meridian, contributing to legitimate projects while also developing honeypot applications designed to attract industrial espionage. By night, I wore recording devices to social events where Derek gradually tried to recruit me into Carlos's network. The hardest part wasn't the undercover work. It was watching my mother's condition deteriorate while maintaining the pretense that we were facing it alone. She had to continue attending her regular appointments, living in our same apartment, following all the patterns that Carlos's surveillance team expected to see. But the most unexpected twist came 3 months into the operation. Derek, in his effort to build rapport with me, started sharing stories about his own family. Real stories, I realized, not part of his cover identity. He told me about his uncle who had made some bad choices, but was trying to make things right. He talked about growing up poor, about feeling like he had to prove himself in elite circles, about the pressure to succeed at any cost. And slowly, I began to see that Derek wasn't just a villain in this story, he was another victim of Carlos's manipulation, recruited as a teenager and groomed into a life of crime that he was now too deep in to escape. I didn't want to laugh at you that day, he admitted during one of our recorded conversations. But my uncle, he tests loyalty in weird ways. He wanted to see if I'd choose the mission over basic human decency. And you chose the mission. I chose survival. But I've been thinking about what your mother said, about leaving people alone when they need you. My own mother. I haven't spoken to her in 5 years because my uncle said it was too risky. This revelation changed everything about our operation. Derek wasn't just a target. He was a potential ally who might be willing to turn against his uncle if we could offer him a way out. Working with the FBI, we developed a new strategy. Instead of simply gathering evidence against Carlos, we would try to flip Derek and use him to dismantle the entire network from the inside. The climax came on a rainy Thursday evening in March. Carlos had finally taken the bait, agreeing to meet with me personally to discuss opportunities for mutual benefit. The meeting was set for a warehouse in Oakland, supposedly to demonstrate some of the stolen technology his organization had acquired. I wore 3 different recording devices and had FBI agents positioned throughout the area. My father, despite official protests, was in a surveillance van 2 blocks away. Even my mother, in one of her clear moments, had insisted on being nearby. "If something happens to you," she'd said, "I want to be close enough to help." Carlos Restrepo was exactly what I'd expected: smooth, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. He showed me millions of dollars worth of stolen intellectual property, offered me contracts that would make me wealthy beyond my dreams, and casually mentioned that people who disappointed him tended to have immigration problems. "Your mother's illness," he said with false sympathy, "such a terrible burden for a young man. The treatments are expensive, I imagine. And if something were to happen to your legal status..." That's when Derek walked in. "Uncle," he said, his voice strained, "we have a problem." Carlos turned, irritated. "What kind of problem?" Derek looked directly at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before: genuine regret, maybe even courage. The kind where I can't do this anymore. What happened next was chaos. Derek revealed that he'd been recording conversations for weeks, that he had evidence of the entire operation, that he was ready to testify against his uncle in exchange for immunity and protection. Carlos reached for a gun. FBI agents burst through the warehouse doors. My father appeared from nowhere, tackling Carlos before he could fire. Derek threw himself between me and Carlos's backup, taking a bullet that was meant for me. In the aftermath, as paramedics worked on Derek and agents secured the scene, I found myself holding my mother's hand in the back of an ambulance. She was having another episode, confused about where we were and why there were so many flashing lights. But when she looked at my father, her face cleared. "Miguel," she whispered, "you came back." "I never left, mi amor. I was just waiting for it to be safe." Derek survived, though he spent 3 weeks in the hospital and will walk with a limp for the rest of his life. Carlos and 14 members of his organization were arrested and later convicted on charges ranging from industrial espionage to conspiracy to commit murder. The trial was a media sensation, the story of the tech industry conspiracy, the undercover operation, the family reunited after 20 years. But for me, the most important moment came when Derek took the stand to testify against his uncle. "I spent 15 years believing that loyalty meant doing whatever it took to advance the family business," he said. "But David Vasquez showed me what real loyalty looks like. He brought his sick mother to a job interview because she needed him, even though he knew it might cost him everything. I mocked him for it, but he was the stronger man that day." After the trial, Derek and I had a long conversation in the hospital where he was recovering from his injuries. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "For the laughter, for the harassment, for everything my family put you through. You took a bullet for me," I pointed out. "Least I could do." "But David, that day in the lobby, when your mother stood up to me, she said something I can't forget. She said I'd leave my own mother alone when she needed me. She was right. I had." Derek used his plea agreement and the money he'd earned from his cooperation to relocate his own mother to a safe location and pay for the medical care she'd been unable to afford. The last I heard, he was working for a cybersecurity firm, using his knowledge of criminal networks to help protect other companies from the kind of attacks he'd once facilitated. My mother's condition continued to progress, but the resolution of the case meant we could finally access the experimental treatments we'd only dreamed of before. Some of them helped, not enough to stop the disease, but enough to give us more good days, more moments of clarity, more time together as a family. My father moved back in with us, and for the first time in my adult life, I had 2 parents. Watching them together, him reading to her when she was confused, her caring for him when the weight of 20 years of secrecy and guilt became too much, I learned what love really looked like. The job at Meridian became everything I'd hoped it would be, but in ways I never expected. Instead of just writing code, I became part of a team that helps protect other companies and families from the kind of targeting we'd experienced. Mischan promoted me to lead a new cybersecurity initiative, and we've prevented dozens of similar operations from succeeding. But the most unexpected development came a year after the trial, when I received a call from an FBI agent with news that changed everything once again. "We've been tracking financial records from Carlos's operation," she said, "and we discovered something interesting. He's been systematically targeting the children of people who opposed him, but there's another pattern we missed." "What kind of pattern?" "All of his victims were connected to a single immigration lawyer who helped families escape Central America in the 1980s and 1990s. Your mother was one of her clients." The lawyer, it turned out, had been murdered 3 years earlier in what police had thought was a random robbery. But the FBI's investigation revealed that she'd been killed to prevent her from warning families like ours about the targeting campaign. "She left behind files," the agent continued. "Detailed records of every family she'd helped, including yours. And David, she documented something your mother never told you." My hands were shaking as I opened the file she handed me. Inside was a birth certificate I'd never seen before, immigration documents with details that had been hidden from me, and a letter written in my mother's handwriting. The letter was addressed to me, meant to be read after her death, explaining that she hadn't just fled El Salvador to escape poverty or gang violence. She'd been a teacher who had witnessed government forces murdering student activists, and her testimony had helped convict several military officers of human rights violations. The people trying to kill my father weren't just criminals. They were connected to the same military network my mother had testified against decades earlier. Our family hadn't just been unlucky targets of a technology theft ring. We'd been marked for elimination by people seeking revenge for crimes that had been committed before I was even born. "Why didn't she tell me?" I asked the agent. "Because she wanted you to grow up American, not looking over your shoulder. She wanted you to believe that courage was rewarded, that speaking truth to power was worth the risk, not that it painted a target on your family's back." I shared this revelation with my parents the next evening, during one of my mother's clear periods. She listened quietly as I read her own letter aloud, watched my father's face as he learned about the courage that had brought her to his attention in the first place. "I'm not surprised," he said finally. "The woman who stood up to Derek in that lobby, who raised you to be the man you are, that same strength got her in trouble with some very dangerous people 25 years ago." My mother reached for both our hands. "I never wanted you to be afraid," she said. "Either of you. Fear makes people small, makes them cruel like that boy Derek used to be. I wanted you to be brave enough to do what's right, even when it costs you something." "It almost cost us everything," I pointed out. She smiled, and for a moment the disease fell away completely. "But it didn't. We're here, we're together, and we help stop bad people from hurting other families. That's worth a little risk." 3 months later, Derek contacted me with news that his testimony had helped authorities in 3 countries arrest members of the military network that had been targeting families like ours for decades. The case made international headlines, led to congressional hearings about domestic surveillance, and resulted in new protections for witnesses and their families. But for me, the most meaningful outcome was simpler. For the first time in my life, my family was truly safe. Today, 5 years after that morning in Meridian's lobby, I lead a team of 12 engineers working on cybersecurity solutions for companies and nonprofits around the world. My mother lives in a specialized care facility now, and while the disease has taken much of her memory, she still lights up when she sees my father and me during our daily visits. Derek and I stay in touch. He sends Christmas cards from Denver, where he's rebuilding his relationship with his mother and working with a federal task force targeting international cybercrime. Last month, he called to tell me he was getting married to a woman who knows his whole story and loves him anyway. "I keep thinking about that day," he said during our conversation. "If I hadn't laughed at you, if I just kept my mouth shut and done my job, Carlos might have succeeded. Your family would have been destroyed, and dozens of other families would still be at risk." "So you're saying your cruelty accidentally saved the day?" He was quiet for a moment. "I'm saying your mother's courage saved the day. My cruelty just gave her a chance to show it. Miss Chin retired 2 years ago, but she still serves on Meridian's board and has become something of a mentor to me. At her retirement party, she pulled me aside for a final conversation. "I want you to know," she said, "that hiring you changed our entire company culture. We've implemented family-friendly policies, expanded our employee assistance programs, and made it clear that taking care of loved ones is a strength, not a liability. Thank you for taking a chance on me." I didn't take a chance. I made a choice. The choice to hire someone who demonstrates loyalty, sacrifice, and moral courage under pressure. Those aren't common qualities in this industry. She paused, then smiled. "Besides, I knew your mother was special the moment she stood up to that young man in our lobby. Anyone who raised a son willing to risk his career for her deserves to have that loyalty honored. 6 months ago, I received an unexpected email that brought the story full circle. It was from a young woman named Sofia Martinez, Derek's cousin, who had been following the news coverage of our case. I wanted to thank you, she wrote, for giving my cousin a chance to become a better person. But I also wanted to tell you something he probably doesn't know. Sophia explained that she had been present the day Derek was recruited into Carlos's organization 15 years earlier. She'd watched her uncle manipulate a scared teenager with promises of family acceptance, financial security, and revenge against a world that had treated them as disposable. Derek wasn't born cruel, she wrote. He was made that way by people who convinced him that showing weakness would get him killed. When he laughed at you that day, he was playing a role he'd been forced into as a child. But when he took that bullet for you, he was finally being himself. The email included a photo I'd never seen before, Derek at age 16, standing beside his mother at his high school graduation. He was smiling with genuine joy, his arm around a woman who looked proud and hopeful. It was hard to reconcile that image with the calculating, cruel young man I'd met in Meridian's lobby. People aren't born good or evil, Sophia continued. They're shaped by the choices they make and the chances they're given to make different ones. You gave Derek a chance to choose differently, even after he'd hurt you. That's the kind of person the world needs more of. I showed the email to my father, who had become my closest confidant as we navigated my mother's illness together. It doesn't excuse what he did, I said. No, my father agreed. But it explains it. And more importantly, it shows what's possible when someone gets a second chance to do the right thing. Last month, I was invited to speak at a conference about workplace inclusion and family-friendly corporate policies. Standing at the podium, looking out at an audience of HR professionals and corporate executives, I found myself thinking about that moment in Meridian's lobby when Derek's laughter seemed to announce the end of my professional prospects. The question isn't whether we should accommodate employees' family responsibilities, I told the audience. The question is whether we want to work with people who have demonstrated they'll sacrifice for others, or people who will sacrifice others for their own advancement. After my presentation, a young man approached me, probably in his mid-20s, nervous but determined. Mr. Vasquez, he said, I'm starting a new job next week, and my grandmother has dementia. She raised me, and I'm her primary caregiver. I've been agonizing over whether to disclose this during my first week, or try to hide it until I've proven myself valuable. I looked at this young man, saw my own uncertainty reflected in his eyes, and thought about all the ways this story could have gone differently. Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them early, tell them clearly, and tell them what you can do rather than what you can't. The right employer will see your caregiving responsibilities as evidence of your character, not a liability to be managed. What if they see it as a weakness? Then you'll know they're not the right employer. Better to find out during your first week than after you've invested years in a company that doesn't value the things that make you human. He thanked me and walked away, and I wondered if I'd given him good advice or set him up for disappointment. The truth is, not every employer is like Ms. Chun, not every workplace is like Meridian. Some companies really do see family responsibilities as liabilities. Some managers really do penalize employees who can't work 80-hour weeks. But here's what I've learned. The companies that penalize loyalty and sacrifice, that reward cruelty and selfishness, that see human needs as inconveniences, those companies create Derek Martinez's. They build cultures where people learn to mock vulnerability, where showing compassion becomes a career liability, where employees are trained to see each other as competition rather than colleagues. The companies like Meridian, the leaders like Ms. Chun, who understand that our willingness to care for others makes us better employees, not worse. They're not just building better workplaces, they're building a better world. 2 weeks ago, I received a call that brought everything full circle in the most unexpected way possible. It was from the warden at a federal prison in Arizona, where Carlos Restrepo has been serving his sentence. Mr. Vasquez, the warden said, Carlos has been asking to speak with you. He says he has information that might be important to your family's safety. My first instinct was to refuse. Carlos had orchestrated years of harassment, threatened my mother when she was at her most vulnerable, and tried to destroy everything my family had built. What could he possibly have to say that I would want to hear? But something nagged at me. A conversation I'd had with my father months earlier about the importance of understanding your enemies, of learning from them even when you can't forgive them. So I went. Carlos looked older than his 53 years, worn down by prison life and the weight of his crimes. But his eyes were still sharp, calculating, searching for angles even in defeat. "David," he said when I sat down across from him in the visiting room. "Thank you for coming. What do you want?" He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I want to tell you why I really targeted your family. It wasn't just about the encryption technology or revenge against your father." I waited, not trusting myself to speak. 28 years ago, your mother testified against my brother in El Salvador. Lieutenant Colonel Eduardo Restrepo, executed for war crimes based largely on her eyewitness account. I spent 3 decades building the resources to make your family pay for that testimony. The visiting room felt airless. I'd known about my mother's testimony, but not about the specific officer she'd helped convict, not about the family connection that had made our targeting personal rather than professional. "But here's what I learned too late," Carlos continued. "Your mother didn't just testify about what she witnessed. She testified to save other witnesses who were being hunted. She saves lives every day because your mother had the courage to speak truth to power." I stared at the photograph, seeing my mother's face at an age I'd never known her, recognizing the same determination she'd shown when facing Derek in Meridian's lobby. "Why are you telling me this?" Carlos's expression shifted, became something I hadn't expected to see, genuine remorse. "Because I spent 30 years hating the wrong person. Your mother wasn't the enemy. She was exactly what the world needs more of. Someone willing to sacrifice for strangers, to do what's right even when it costs everything." He paused, then added quietly, "Someone who raised a son with the same values. Derek told me what you did for him, how you gave him a chance to choose differently. That's not something my brother would have done. Maybe your mother was right about which side deserved to win." I left the prison with more questions than answers, but also with something I hadn't expected, a deeper understanding of my mother's courage and its consequences. That evening, I shared Carlos's revelation with my parents during our daily visit to my mother's care facility. She was having a difficult day, struggling to recognize us, agitated by the unfamiliar environment. But when I showed her the photograph of herself as a young woman, something flickered behind her eyes. "Maria," she whispered, touching the image of the little girl's face. "Is she safe?" "She's safe, Mom. She became a doctor. She helps people." My mother smiled, and for a moment the disease lifted completely. "Good. That's good. Someone should help people." My father took her hand. "You help people, Elena. More than you ever knew." "Did I?" she asked, genuinely uncertain. "I can't remember helping anyone." "You helped me," I said. "You helped Derek find his way back to being a decent person. You helped Maria Santos grow up to save lives. You helped dozens of families by testifying against people who would have hurt them." She considered this, her face cycling through confusion and clarity like a radio searching for a signal. "I don't remember being brave," she said finally. "I just remember being scared and doing what seemed right anyway." That, I realized, was the most perfect definition of courage I'd ever heard. 3 months ago, I received an email that made me understand the full scope of what my mother's testimony had accomplished. It was from Dr. Maria Santos, the little girl in the photograph Carlos had shown me. "Mr. Vasquez," she wrote, "I have been trying to find your family for 15 years, ever since I learned what your mother sacrificed to save mine. I wanted to thank her and to tell you about the ripple effects of her courage." Maria's email included photographs of the clinic she runs in rural Guatemala, where she provides free medical care to families who have nowhere else to turn. But more than that, she'd used her position to document human rights violations and provide safe testimony for other witnesses, carrying on the same work my mother had begun 3 decades earlier. "Your mother's courage didn't just save my family," Maria wrote. "It created a model for how one person's willingness to speak truth can protect entire communities." I've helped coordinate testimony from 47 witnesses over the past 10 years, and every time someone is afraid to come forward, I tell them about Elena Vasquez, the teacher who gave up everything to protect people she'd never met. The email included a video message recorded on a phone in Maria's clinic. She spoke directly to the camera, but her words were clearly meant for my mother. "Senora Elena, you probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I remember how you held my hand in that courthouse, how you told me that brave people protect each other, how you promised that speaking the truth was worth whatever it cost. I became a doctor because of what you taught me that day, that helping people is the most important thing we can do with our lives. Thank you for showing me what courage looks like. I played the video for my mother during one of her clear moments, watching her face as she tried to process this connection to a past she could barely remember. "She's beautiful," my mother said when the video ended. Did I really know her? You saved her life, Mom. And she spent her life saving others because of what you taught her. My mother was quiet for a long moment, staring at the frozen image of Maria's face on my phone screen. "I hope she's happy," she said finally. "I hope all the children are happy." Last week, Derek called with news that brought our story full circle in the most unexpected way yet. He'd been contacted by the FBI about a new case, a technology theft ring targeting immigrants and refugees, using the same tactics Carlos's organization had employed. "They want me to go undercover again," he said. "Use my experience with Carlos's operation to help identify and stop the new network." "Are you going to do it?" "I think so. But David, I wanted to ask you something first. The FBI says this new operation is targeting people like your family was targeted, people who testified against war criminals, people who stood up to corrupt governments, people whose courage made them enemies." He paused, then continued, "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you consider working with me on this? Your experience, your technical skills, your understanding of what these families are going through. We could help a lot of people." I thought about my mother's words to Maria Santos, "Brave people protect each other." I thought about the ripple effects of one person's courage, how my mother's testimony had saved Maria, how Maria's work had protected 47 other witnesses, how each act of bravery created the possibility for more. "I'm in," I said. Just like that. "Derek, you took a bullet for me. More than that, you chose to be better than the person you were raised to be. If you think we can help protect people like my mother, like Maria Santos, like all the families who are being targeted for doing the right thing, then yes, I'm in." The new operation launches next month. It's dangerous, complicated work that will require me to balance my responsibilities to my family with my obligation to help others in similar situations. But I keep thinking about something my mother said during one of our conversations about the original case against Carlos. "Mijo," she'd said, "when you have the power to help people and you choose not to use it, you're not protecting yourself, you're protecting the people who want to hurt others." She was right, of course. She usually was. Yesterday was my mother's 60th birthday. We celebrated at the care facility with a small party. My father, me, Derek and his fiancée, Miss Chin, and a few of the nurses who have become like family to us. Mom was having a good day, present and engaged, laughing at Derek's jokes and asking thoughtful questions about everyone's lives. Near the end of the party, she pulled me aside with that same determined expression she'd worn in Meridian's lobby 5 years earlier. "David," she said, "I need to tell you something important." "What is it, Mom?" "I'm proud of you. Not because you're successful, not because you got a good job or make good money. I'm proud because when that man laughed at us, you didn't laugh back. You stayed kind even when someone was cruel to you." She took my hands in hers, and her grip was stronger than it had been in months. "Promise me something," she continued. "Promise me you'll keep choosing kindness, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. The world has enough people who laugh at others' pain. It needs more people who stand up for each other." "I promise, Mom." "Good." She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the young woman in that courthouse photograph, holding a scared little girl's hand and choosing courage over safety. "Now go help people." That's what we do. As I write this, I'm preparing for the new undercover operation that Derek and I will begin next week. It's risky work. The people we're targeting have already killed to protect their operation, and there's no guarantee that our cover identities will hold up under scrutiny. But I keep thinking about the chain of events that started with Derek's laughter in that corporate lobby. How his cruelty revealed his uncle's conspiracy. How my mother's courage inspired Derek's redemption. How Carlos's confession led us to Maria Santos. How Maria's work protecting witnesses created a model we can use to help other families. Every action creates ripples. Every choice to be cruel or kind, to help or harm, to stand up or stay silent. It all matters more than we can possibly know in the moment. Derek's laughter that day was meant to humiliate me, to assert his dominance, to make me seem small and unprofessional. Instead, it set in motion a series of events that exposed a criminal conspiracy, reunited my family, saved dozens of other families from similar targeting, and created a friendship between two people who should have been enemies. My mother's decision to stand up to him wasn't strategic or calculated. It was just a sick woman defending her son because that's what mothers do. But her courage in that moment revealed something essential about who she was, who she'd always been, and who she'd raised me to be. Miss Chin's choice to see family loyalty as a strength rather than a weakness wasn't just good business. It was a recognition that the qualities that make us good family members are the same ones that make us good colleagues, good leaders, good human beings. The questions I started with, whether I was wrong to bring my mother to that interview, whether I should have prioritized professional advancement over family care, seem almost absurd now. Of course I was right to bring her. Of course family comes first when someone you love is scared and vulnerable. But the deeper question remains, what kind of world are we building when taking care of the people we love is seen as a professional liability? When our connections to others are viewed as weaknesses rather than strengths? When companies reward the Derek Martinezes of the world, at least until they're caught, while penalizing the people who sacrifice for others? I think about all the other job candidates who didn't get hired because they needed flexible schedules to care for aging parents, or child care support to manage young families, or mental health accommodations to deal with trauma. I think about all the Derek Martinezes who are still out there, mocking vulnerability and mistaking cruelty for strength, climbing corporate ladders by stepping on people who are struggling. But I also think about the Maria Sandozes of the world, people who turned their own experiences of being helped into a commitment to help others. I think about the Miss Chins, who recognize that our willingness to sacrifice for each other is exactly what makes us valuable employees and leaders. I think about the companies like Meridian that understand family responsibilities as evidence of character rather than signs of weakness. The world has enough people who laugh at others' struggles. It needs more people who understand that our connections to each other, our willingness to sacrifice, to show up, to choose love over convenience, are what make us human. 5 years ago, Derek Martinez laughed when I brought my mother to a job interview. He thought he was witnessing someone's professional suicide. Instead, he was witnessing the beginning of his own redemption, my family's reunion, and a conspiracy's downfall. Sometimes the moments that seem like endings are actually beginnings. Sometimes the choices that seem like mistakes are exactly what the world needed us to make. My mother taught me that brave people protect each other. Derek learned that it's never too late to choose kindness over cruelty. Miss Chin showed me that the right leaders value character over convenience. And Carlos Restrepo, sitting in his prison cell, finally understood that 30 years of revenge against the wrong person had cost him everything while accomplishing nothing. The new operation Derek and I are starting will put us at risk again. There will be more people like Carlos out there, more networks targeting families for having the courage to speak truth to power. But there will also be more opportunities to help, more chances to turn someone else's cruelty into their own redemption, more possibilities for one person's courage to create ripples that protect people they'll never meet. When Derek laughed at me that day, he was trying to make me small. Instead, he gave me the chance to show who I really was, and more importantly, he gave himself the chance to become someone better than who he'd been. That's the power of treating each other with dignity, even when, especially when, we don't deserve it. That's what my mother understood when she stood up to Derek in that lobby, what Ms. Chin recognized when she chose character over credentials, what Derek discovered when he chose courage over loyalty to his uncle's criminal empire. We all have the power to laugh at others' struggles or to stand up for each other. We all get to choose, every day, whether we're going to be people who make the world harder for those who are already struggling, or people who make it a little easier for everyone to be human. I brought my mother to that job interview because she needed me, and because I'd rather fail honestly than succeed by abandoning the people I love. Derek laughed because he'd been taught that showing weakness would get him killed. Miss Chin hired me because she understood that loyalty and sacrifice are exactly the qualities you want in an employee. 5 years later, I know we all made the right choices, even Derek's cruel laughter, which set everything else in motion. The question isn't what you would do in my situation. The question is, who do you want to be when someone else is facing an impossible choice between career and family, between advancement and loyalty, between what's expected and what's right? Do you want to be the person who laughs, or the person who understands that choosing love over convenience is the strongest thing any of us can do? The world needs your answer.